Hello, Philip. You made it. Thank God. I'm glad that you were able to make it. And we have attendees streaming in.
Oh, Phil, you are connected now. Can you test your audio?
Sorry, thank you. Just what's her name? Her laptop. It was actually the laptop. It has a problem.
Great. I'm seeing attendees joining. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this PeaceCon regional mail session. We're going to begin shortly. Just going to allow for a couple of minutes for everyone to join. Once again, thank you so much for joining, and we will be starting the webinar shortly, maybe in about a minute or so, just to allow everyone to join. So thank you so much.
Okay.
Great.
Are you okay with your laptop, or I have another laptop? Can I give you my laptop, which is better? I have an extra laptop.
Yeah, it's working now. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Great.
Once again, hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. Thank you so much for joining this regional mail session at PeaceCon. We're going to be beginning shortly. We're just allowing a few minutes for people to join this conversation. Once again, thank you so much for joining. We already have a really good number of participants, so this is going to be a great conversation. Yep, and as I said, we'll be beginning in about a minute or so. All right. Actually, let me begin. We are 5 past the hour. So, hi everyone. My name is Saurav Upadhyay, and I am the Research Manager for Learning and Evaluation at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. On behalf of my team, we want to welcome you to PeaceCon Regional Mail Sessions. The regional MEL mail, or Monitoring, Evaluation, Learning sessions, expand our PeaceCon conference to be inclusive of regional conversations. These sessions are hosted with the help of colleagues from the respective geographic areas and highlights regionally relevant peacebuilding issues in a slot that most aligns with the region. So I'm so excited to welcome you to this session on East Africa, which I am so grateful to be co-hosting with my dear colleague and friend, Moses. I have had the pleasure of working with Moses when I was working at the American Friends Service Committee, so it makes me really happy to be able to work with him to coordinate and put the session together. Before I hand it over to Moses, I just want to say a big thank you to Moses for putting this panel together, and also want to say a big thank you to all of the amazing panelists we have today. So thank you so much for your time, for giving us this time to sort of learn from you. And finally, yeah, thank you all for those who've joined. I really look forward to this conversation. And I'm just going to hand it over to you, Moses. Take it away, Moses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saurav. Also a great pleasure for me to collaborate with you on this particular initiative, trying to amplify peace work around the world. And dear participants, welcome to this session on Mail for Empowering Religious Leaders for Influencing Policies and also engaging in mediation work. So it's a great pleasure for us to actually work with you today. So we will have a panel of 4, and I will explain how that is divided. It's a panel of 4, and it will be structurally 3 panelists presenting initially, and then we'll have one of the panel members that will be doing storytelling. So storytelling, that will be a religious leader that will be coming in to give a glaring examples on how they've been able to use their acquired skills to influence and bring change in some of the socio-political dynamics that could be occurring in different countries. So it's really been great. So I will start by introducing the members of the team, and I will start with Dr. Agnes. Dr. Agnes Abo is of the World Country Committee moderator. She is a moderator, and is an African laywoman and accomplished development consultant advocate. She has a wealth of knowledge and experience in ecumenical community work and peace building in Africa, South America, North America, Europe, United Kingdom, and Australia. Her CV is very rich. And I would say you can read more on the page where we've actually put the bios already. So Dr. Agnes dreams of a world where every man and woman's dignity will be upheld, a world where every person's basic needs will be secured, a world where there will be no racial discrimination, negative ethnicities, xenophobia, as well as related violence, and finally, a world free of sexual and gender violence. So this is Dr. Agnes. She's actually speaking with us today from Nairobi in Kenya. The next person I will introduce is Philip Delgado, who is the country director for Christian Aid. Christian Aid is a British international NGO, and Philip has over 20 years experience in relief work and development, and with extensive experience in the region, that means in the Great Lakes region in East Africa as a whole. He has also worked in South Sudan, Kenya, Burundi, Chad, and Somaliland. He is currently the country director for Christian Aid for Burundi. He holds a master's degree in project planning and management and a Bachelor of Science in agricultural engineering. So Philip is also speaking to us from Bujumbura, Burundi. The next person I will present is Jack Sanya. Jack Sanya is also the country director for Norwegian Church Aid for Burundi. And Jack is a water and sanitation expert with over 25 years of work experience in humanitarian and development settings in Europe, Africa, and Asia. He has worked in a range of settings from direct implementation to implementation through local partners, including actors within the Red Cross movement. Jack holds a postgraduate diploma from the Swiss Federal Technical Institute. So Jack will be speaking to us from Bujumbura in Burundi, East Africa, Great Lakes region. The next panelist I should introduce is Reverend Sylvestre Bizimana, who is the General Secretary for the Burundi National Council of Churches. And Reverend Sylvestre is actually based in Bujumbura, and he is a senior pastor of the Free Methodist Church in the parish of one of the areas in Burundi called Kamenge. And previously he served as a secondary school headmaster and teacher in some of the communities in Burundi. He holds a Master of Organizational Leadership, a Master of Candidate of Theology, and a Bachelor of Social Work and Community Development. He has extensive experience in peace, reconciliation, quiet, and shorter diplomacy. And we would say Reverend Sylvestre has actually been like our tool, if we could call it that way, a useful tool in transforming and also engaging with other religious leaders in the Great Lakes, in East Africa, and on the African continent and beyond. So my own name is Moses Chastier. I'm the country representative for the American Foreign Service Committee for Burundi. And I have over 13 years of international peace building with the United Nations missions in Burundi. There were 2 missions, and then later on moved to join the American Foreign Service Committee, where I serve as country representative now. I have a master's degree in project management. I also have many years of strategic planning and monitoring and evaluation trainings. I also have a certificate in leadership from the Harvard Kennedy School in the US. So that said, we will dive straight into our topic, and our topic is about empowering religious leaders to see how they can actually be those ambassadors of change, influencing policies, and also looking at issues to do with mediation. For us to dive into this, I want to take us a little bit down memory lane to say it's actually about 104 years when the First World War ever ended. And also to add to that, I would say it's also about 77 years when the Second World War also came to end. And the thought would have been that the world would have been more stable and people would have been more having their rights being respected. People would have actually have the space to exercise their daily activities. But unfortunately, after these wars, there was a kind of transition from interstate wars to intrastate wars. And Gladish actually says that clearly in 2004 when he says there were more, there have been more civil wars, more than 119 after the Second World War. And that is very true because if we look at the dynamics, especially on the continent, the African continent or other developing world continents, you'll find that within the countries, there have been a lot in terms of intra-state conflicts taking place. And the international community is really positioning itself to see how they can bring solutions to those instabilities within these countries. At the same time, the international community is also bringing up new strategies, trying to see how they can foster peace, bring more stability, enabling governments to take up their responsibilities. We would say this has not really been very easy because this notwithstanding, the instability has continued to rise, has been on the rise. So the question is, why is this happening? The United Nations in particular also has been able to move through different approaches from peacekeeping to peace building, special political missions, and this notwithstanding, the instability continued to rise. Africa is a continent that continues to suffer as other continents that have similar experiences. And again, we'll see where the instability goes more towards the direction of that comes from democratic governance and also related to normal good governance that we want to see around the countries. So this has been a perpetual situation on the continent where you find the different actors, the different governments actually experiencing this. And recently we know of the case that is happening in Burkina Faso, and there has been the case in Mali. There has also been the case in the, what do I say? There has been Mali, there has been Burkina Faso, there has been the Guinea. Guinea also has experienced that. So to say that these are just examples, but it has been quite many, especially on the African continent. But what is important is to note that when this is happening, the international community, we don't fold our arms and just sit. We try to do something. They try to come in with solutions, try to mediate to see how this can actually be brought to normalcy. But this has not been very easy because, again, at some point, there are vested interests that we can't tell how this is happening. And as such, the instability can go on and go on. But also the international community also faced the challenge of restricted spaces where they cannot actually have that environment where they can operate freely and try to bring ideas for change. And I want to add that in addition to that, the instability of that we're mentioning, we also have the COVID situation, which has also been a problem since 2020. And governments have actually been able to take this as an opportunity to further create restricted spaces where it becomes very challenging for the citizens to actually feel free or for the international community to actually have a say in the way the dynamics within the countries are occurring. So this presents a situation where the governments are quick to understand that they have to reinforce the restricted space using their sovereignty. And using this sovereignty is something that they have the power to say, we can decide your fate in either being in the country or supporting a country process. So this has been very challenging. So what we've been able to think about is to look for alternatives. We can't allow instability to continue to exist. We can't allow violence to continue to be the way out, that we have to have our communities, our countries, our continents to be existing. So this notwithstanding, we said we have to look for alternatives. This caused us to go back, looking at national actors, trying to understand if we have the restricted space for the international community, for special envoys that could come to countries and try to intervene. Could we now look at an alternative of using the citizens of that country? This requires us to do a kind of stakeholder analysis, national stakeholder analysis, and come up with possibilities, actors that can actually bring change. And that's how we came about identifying that religious leaders could play a great role. So today, I won't go further into this. I will let our panelists really tell us what has been this approach and how has it been happening with religious leaders? How did we come about this and where are we today? So you'll be listening first to Jack Sanya, who is the country director for Norwegian Church Aid, that will be telling us a little bit, but not all about the bed of roses, but also the challenges and how we've been able to overcome this. Thank you. Jack?
Thank you. Thanks, Moses. Hi to everyone. I think it's a pleasure for us today here to share the strategic plan of action from the Burundian religious leaders. And first of all, I would just want to, let's say, share with you the landscape, the religious leaders' landscape in profile in Burundi. Here in Burundi, we have around 88% of the population who belongs to one of these religious, let's say, denomination. Let's say 61% are Catholics, around 24% are Protestant, and around 3% are Muslim. So you can easily imagine that, I mean, with 88% of the population belonging to one of these religious denomination, it is easier as a religious leader to get access to those population, to the majority of the population. And those population, we find among those population, we find those decision makers, namely like politicians and other authorities who plays a key role when it's come to the stability of the country. So well, it means simply that, I mean, with religious leaders, the access to the population, but also to key decision makers, politicians, authorities is easier through like the religious leader. And that's exactly what we try to do in Burundi through let's say the strategic plan of action with religious leaders. And this plan of action, before I get into the challenges we face, I will just share some of the let's say outcomes of like having this religious leaders plan of action. First of all, I think, as I said, it has enabled us, helped us reaching, let's say, politicians, some decision makers, especially in terms of crisis. I will give an example. Here in Burundi, there was in 2018 a big crisis between NGOs and the government. And there, we religious actors managed to resolve one of the issues through the access to one of the ministers. Like there was a Minister of Finance, and there was one issue in relation to the Minister of Finance, which was very unclear, for which NGOs was like kind of really somehow in trouble. And thanks to access to the Ministry of Finance through the religious leaders, we managed to, when I say we, is we, Christian Aid, American Fund Service Committee, and IRENE, and Norwegian Church Aid, to resolve that issue. Just because we had access to the ministry, and we managed to talk to him, and then we resolved the problem. This is one example. Another one I will share also is the way, I mean, this working with religion leaders help us on implementing the triple nexus. Nowadays, we are talking a lot about the triple nexus: humanitarian, development, and peace building. And the part of peace building, which is extremely important, we have seen is like kind of, it is very important that the religious leaders play a role through the three stages, like during the humanitarian, but also development and peace building especially. And what also finally, before I engage, I go into the challenges we're facing on having this strategic plan of action. What we have seen also is like with many religious actors, we needed to strengthen, to build up their capacity for them to really do this, let's say, the work we are expecting them to do, which is like getting access to those decision makers. And this capacity building part is extremely important. For instance, we have realized that with some, let's say, religious actors, if you have some non-peace building programs, project, then it's easier to somehow, let's say, support them on
losing you. We are losing you.
Yeah.
Lost you.
Jack? Oh, I think
establishing
it's
of,
internet.
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Jack. Yes, Jack.
Yes, yes. So now I'm now talking about a bit about the challenges we face when we are establishing, when we were, let's say, writing and the peace building plan of action. I think one of them is linked to the profile of the religious actors in Burundi, where we have like Catholics, which is one block. We have also Muslim, which is one block, but with the Protestant, we have many denominations. So it was very difficult to kind of get on board, bring on board some of the denominations. So this is one of the challenges we face. And as a strategy to resolve this issue, I mean, we kept somehow engaging with them, you know, and some of them managed to join. Though up to now, many of these, let's say, denomination from the Protestant did not join the peace building plan of action. And another challenge also we really encountered is about the heaviness of the process. So it took a long time to finalize, let's say, to start the implementation, to validate the plan of action, the religious leaders' plan of action. It's a long process. And just for an example, as an example, we first we get the first draft validated in 2016. Then, due to the context dynamics, it was revised. The plan of action was revised on 2018, and it was finally validated in 2019 before the implementation start really. So just to tell you that, I mean, it's a long process, and then you need to be very, very, very patient to let's say, to have this work done. So those are let's say, what we did so far when it's come to the strategic plan of action with religious leaders, and some of the outcomes, as I mentioned, and also challenges that we face along the road, and how we managed to, let's say, resolve some of them. And I think from now on, I will give back the floor to, I will leave the floor to Moses.
Thank you, Jack. That was great. Bringing out the fact that, because this happens in every country, where we have many denominations, and at the same time, many religious leaders, because they actually go through that call to want to serve. And this is an opportunity that exists in many countries. And when once they become so many, initially we may be looking at this like a challenge, because you'll be looking at it like, if you take a small country that has about 10 million people, and then, or 12 million people, 15 million people, and then you're having over 700 denominations in that country. At first sight, you will say, what is this? What's happening here? But if you reflect very well, it's instead an opportunity where it means every citizen could have access to meeting a man of God, or a woman of God, as we could call it. So that is an opportunity that exists in many countries. But again, it's not just identifying that it's an opportunity, but there's need for us to recognize the need for capacity building, because of course they are there. They are called to serve and to actually serve in the fear of the Lord. But at the same time, the work that we want them to do needs some extra capacity. So which calls for actors to be able to recognize that this is a need and bring that to their attention for them to be able to do that. And when you build the capacities, that's how they can come up, being able to understand that there is need for a strategic plan to be able to canalize all that they think they can do to influence those national processes that are challenging. So I like the idea of the triple nexus, Jack, and it's very important because they're also involved in all of that. And the challenges that are there, as I said, there's that tendency of many being a challenge. So it's instead an opportunity. And then we shouldn't think that change comes overnight. It's something that is progressive. It takes time, and we have to be patient. We have to do accompaniment. We have to continuously understand where the challenges are lying and be able to come accompany those religious leaders to be able to do that. So it's a process, it's lengthy. Sometimes we can actually want to give up. So that said, let me bring on board Philip, the country director for the Christian Aid Burundi, to also shed light on how this has been happening, the concept of engaging with religious leaders. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you very much, Moses, and welcome all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I think I'll just build on to what Moses and my colleague Jack have shared. First of all, maybe just giving a bit of background why religious leaders. I think Moses has highlighted on key areas, which I think is open to all of us. And but I would just want to highlight why, for instance, organizations like ours with the American Friends, Norwegian Church Aid, Christian Aid, or even the National Council of Churches look at working through religious leaders for such kinds of interventions. First, it's their legitimacy. I think one of the things that Moses mentioned earlier, sometimes when external envoys come into a negotiation, sometimes they are not seen as legitimate or bona fide groups of people to address issues in a particular country. Religious leaders, by the virtue of being citizens of that country, are being seen as legitimate groups of people that can sit on the table to negotiate and see the conflict mediation process moved forward. There are also representatives of masses of people. Like Jack said, Burundi is a religious country with most of its population related to one of the different religions, whether Christian, Muslim, or other affiliate religions. Secondly, like I think they said, the coverage of these religious groups is quite huge in terms of geographic coverage, but also in terms of the depth of work they do. Burundi has at least a church or a mosque in every village. And so it is easy to reach a good group of people. And thirdly, I think one of the key principles for us as we work with the religious leaders, we do believe as international organizations, for instance, we are here for a short time, while religious groups are there for a longer time and are able to advance whatever work we bring in. And that the thinking of sustainability of any action is really critical. And that makes it very, very important for any kind of actions to be taken. Because sometimes as external players, we come in to bring our support over a short period of time. And once we move out, if it's not sustained, it is likely that we lose it. And so these groups of people would help sustain and consolidate the gains that are made. But just going back to our own experience and thinking, I think one of the things, I'll just bring a different context. I'm a Kenyan, and one of the things that happened in 2007, when there was a bit of conflict in Kenya, was how inactive the religious groups were. They were quite, until the country began to burn. And sometimes politics and religion is seen to be separate entities. But while we do know that religion plays a critical part in the politics of a country or politics of whatever different groups of people. And so the church actually stood up after that and realized that they have a place in pushing for reforms and changes in a country like ours. It's the same, I think, in South Sudan, where we've seen the religious actors, whether through the National Council of Churches or other outfits, playing a major role in these. And so from the learnings that we've seen in other places, Norwegian Church Aid, American Friends, Christian Aid, and IRENE and other groups came together after the 2015 crisis in Burundi, and saw that the best way to advance this is to bring in our religious groups to speak out and be part of the reform agenda. And through different aspects like shuttle diplomacy, through advocacy, these groups of people have seen and have done a number of different things that we've seen actually perpetuated in the country that would bring an end to probably tensions and different challenges that the country faces. The other key thing for us at that point was also the church and also the other groups play a major role also in development. And I think Jack brought about the idea of the triple nexus. And the church has a role in all these different actions. And already they are being respected because they have health facilities, they have schools, they have a stake in ensuring that the country is at peace, because there's a lot of investment from the churches, from other religious groups, whether it's the Muslims, in some of those development actions. So we saw it is important that the church, the religious groups come together and look at what are the kind of actions or policy changes that they need to do. So the religious action plan that Jack has just elaborated on was culmination of some of the discussions that the religious leaders had after that event, and coming together and putting key areas of need and where they need to hold each other accountable and the nation accountable towards the peace process. Burundi has been a fragile country and is now going to a place where we are reaching some level of stability. And the religious group have a place in all this. And we do believe that if they play their role well, it is them that would drive the policy changes and reforms in the country. And before I finish, I think I just want to highlight a few other key things. We've seen also, like Jack has said, one of the major challenges sometimes for religious leaders is to work together in a coordinated and understandable manner. Religious leaders are human beings. Of course, we expect a lot of them, but like any one of us, they do make mistakes. But we've seen in places where there is no unity among the religious leaders, then it is very difficult to push the peace agenda. But where the religious leaders are united and have common understanding of how peace processes should run and mediation, then we see quite a stride in terms of how that moves. And so for us, it has been a challenge trying to bring the different voices and theological underpinnings that come together with that. But that has been a good learning for us as we look at the different religious groups and bring them together to discuss and see how they can overcome those ideological or theological differences for the common good of the country. Secondly, of course, a number of this fragmentation that Moses and Jacques mentioned would need to be dealt with as even within the churches, because as the church or the other religious groups fragment, it also brings tension within the country. And I think for us, it was a big role trying to bring them together, to sit on the same table, try to bring a united front on some of those key areas. One last item that I would want to point out is also ownership. The process really helped in developing a very, very good strategy for the religious leaders to adopt. But it took time for this group to adopt it and own it on their own. So I think as international agencies, one of our roles was to accompany them, to bring in one of their own, to bring out the key elements that would help them own up the action plan and push for the change that we want. So we do feel this is one of the strategies that would really work in especially contexts like ours that are fragile, to use religious group because of their legitimacy, like I said, and because of their presence on the ground for quicker action whenever they are needed. Thank you, Moses. I'll just pass it back to you again.
Thank you, Phil. And that was quite great in depth that you did there. And you touched on a number of things. And I want to say, when I began the intro into this session, I mentioned the increase in conflicts, civil wars, conflicts within countries, which have, as I said, it became intrastate from interstate after the Second World War. So one thing you was where it can take us on the continent, on some of the continents. The religious 77 years after the Second World War. What we did, that was where you said the inactivity, inaction of the religious groups that were there, because it's not today that religion came. It's been many years. So they've been there, but that sense of response, they have to those national processes that involve the politics. It's not about being a member of a political party. It's about seeing that there is need for you to engage in an unstable environment, that you need to correct some of the wrongs. So these are some of the things that we're trying to, in our work, we've tried to actually bring this out to let them see that they need to stand up. It's a call to action for religious leaders around the world that they can do this. But also recognizing that as international actors, we have limitations. We can't have that access. And we need to actually collaborate. And where it's so restrictive, we need to see how we can actually build those capacities such that there can be enough buffer stock in terms of institutional memories for the capacities, for the technical aspects to actually be followed up. So that was quite great in terms of bringing that out. But we do not want to forget the fact that the religious leaders have different ideological stance that could actually be an impediment to working. But we need to let them understand that it could actually be an advantage for them to recognize their differences, see how they can work on common fronts and bring those stabilities. And then they need to actually say, this is our process. So I want to thank you, Phil, for taking us through that. It's really been quite informative and inspiring. So now I want to call on our queen, the only lady we have in the panel, that is Dr. Agnes Abo, to actually bring us through that same concept. And we are grateful that you could find time, Dr. Agnes Abo. So welcome to the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's quite an honor to share some thoughts on this very important topic of the role of religious leaders in influencing policy and peace building. May I begin by also echoing the reason why religious leaders become critical in policy influencing, in change. One, I think the last speaker, Phil, just touched on it. There is an increasing momentum for religious leaders to acknowledge themselves the divide between what they consider secular political and what they consider religious. They now really begin to wrestle theologically, ideologically, with their role within that context. It's not yet done, but it is a matter that is discussed critically. The second reason, and we find it even more across the continent, is that religious leaders are actually interlocutors between various actors, whether they are conflicting actors, community and state or nation, and that's also very, very important. Now, the second point I'd like to make on the rationale for policy influencing is that it's not that the religious leaders have not been influencing change. Religion in itself is about change, it's about transformation. What it was is that the other non-religious actors had actually isolated, kind of relegated religion as and religious leaders as archaic, not very innovative. But we see in the last 20 years, both from the international community, the government acknowledging the critical role that religion and religious leaders play. There is a downside to it in the sense that particularly the national governments, as we've seen it, tends to pick this power base, this force of religion and religious leaders, and tends to manipulate it. The other thing that I thought I'll raise is about the whole issue of the religious leaders making sure they do bring change within the scope of relationships in terms of values, in terms of making sure of a sense of inclusivity. Their long history in social services has meant that when you look at policies in education, governments now are turning back to religious leaders for wisdom. How do we move? How do we make sure that we are inclusive in our policy formulation? How do we make sure that sectors that were in the past not included are included? And I think the fact that they dominate the religious communities and leaders dominate health, education, humanitarian work, linking them and giving them power with communities makes them a critical actor in any sector of society. The other point I thought I would also make is that in terms of policy influencing, in order to influence policy, you must wield a certain amount of power, respect, and trust. Now, most religious leaders and religious institutions, they struggle with, but they actually do provide inclusive, safe spaces. In most cases, particularly when it comes to bringing together conflicting parties, undertaking mediation, and the whole history of truth and reconciliation commissions on this continent is an example, even in Burundi, where we saw religious leaders provide leadership. We saw the recently laid to rest church leader in South Africa who chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think it is important that we lift this before the national dialogue. If you recollect, the just concluded national dialogue in Burundi was facilitated, chaired by none other than our beloved late Bishop, Methodist Bishop. So when we look at this, there is potential for change, but there are also issues before I go into, in terms of influencing policy also, many of our governments in the region have put together peace architecture. Now, the national peace is influenced by many of our religious leaders. They are, for example, in commissions on overcoming or curbing corruption. And I think it is very important. When we look at the new reformulations of governance constitutions, you will find these leaders. That though, it is important they face. One of the challenges is capacity. That yes, the potentials are there, but capacities are sometimes not adequate. And that accompaniment becomes actors, both international, and to which the religious leaders relate to, and all of them with interest. You therefore need an umpire of some sort. So we have found a number of times accompaniment processes do actually injure the national agendas and national directions of our leaders. The other one is the internal conflicts within religious leadership itself.
Doctor, you're back. It's fine. You were breaking.
And this also religious concepts and religious leaders. Okay, we have seen efforts within religious leaders to address their own internal conflicts and processes. I would like to look at the issue of religious leaders, whilst influencing change, is still got a deficit of gender justice in its leadership. And this has forced international regional organizations to form gender-specific groups. It is good, but it does actually undermine the holistic and wholeness of religious leaders acting together, whether together in terms of men and women. I think another another issue is, particularly in mediation, is enabling religious leaders to constantly review their relationship with the conflict, because it's a tendency of bias. To leave it here and say that what is now the mood internationally, where we see a lot of credibility, a lot of possibility and potentials to unlock within the religious leaders in influencing policy, social change, and in building peace. We need to invest, and we need to be able to accompany these processes for a longer time and give the local national groups, particularly when it comes to international organizations, to give these national leaders more space. The peace agreements, for example, why do they collapse? If you really dig deeper, it's because religious leaders were brought in at the very last moment, not really invited at the very beginning, and not given the space to speak authoritatively and from their own fountains of wisdom, because they do not just get that wisdom alone, they do also interact with other leaders, community leaders, national leaders. And so in conclusion, having mentioned a few of the challenges, it is important to note that today, other than government, it is the religious communities and leadership that interacts with community, with them, and with international organizations. And this gives them a special position, hence the raison d'etre for really building their capacity, engaging with them critically and creatively for purposes of mediation, peace building, reconciliation, and of course, policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Agnes Abo. And yes, you've actually touched on quite a number of things that are very important for this thematic discussion. And just some highlights, I would say, yes, we recognize religious leaders as those interlocutors that come between government, citizens, and also the international community that can actually influence the way governments will even relate with international community members. So it's very important for us to remember this. Again, I want to say, as I was asking the question, from time immemorial, for 77 years, for 104 years, when did religion come? So we see that there has been that increasing momentum for religious leaders to want to take up responsibilities and be able to bring change. And one area that you touched, which is very important, is that the aftermath of conflict is that we need to have reconciliation. And again, Africa has had quite a good number, especially East Africa. You mentioned late Archbishop Desmond Tutu that was recently buried, and he played a key role in seeing how the South African reconciliation process could actually take place. Also to say he also played key roles in other apartheid-related efforts that were there and needed to be discontinued. I would cite Togo, where also the reconciliation, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Togo was headed by a religious leader, and also Burundi. So you'll find that in most of these countries, that anxiety, that increasing momentum to act is there and also recognized by the authorities that be, to be able to nominate them, to let them go through that process and get to those positions. But I would say the international community has something. We don't need to continuously think that these are not actors that can bring change, because you mentioned something, Dr. Abo, that religious leaders sometimes are relegated. They are called at the last minute. But again, these are the people that are closer to the population and can actually make a difference by talking and sensitizing and causing the population to see need for belonging. So it's time that as the international community, we start thinking, or governments will start thinking that there is need to let there be an inclusive process that can actually involve them from the very beginning and seeing how they can bring those ideas, they can be those ambassadors down there to bring the population to being participants to the national processes that are very interesting. So it's never too easy. You talked about it. It's a process. We continue to appreciate that. We need to know that it takes time. It doesn't come overnight. So thank you, not taking so much time. The question now is, these have been explained. The concept is there. So concretely, what has happened? Has there been any change? Have we been able to get to influencing, apart from the concepts, the principles that we've tried to explain, the challenges? We want to hear exactly a storytelling from Reverend Sylvestre. That is one of those religious leaders that have actually been very active, benefited from all these processes, and also took part. So this is the part where we see the change, moving from capacity building, bringing them together, accompaniment, and seeing how they now start doing the work. So let's listen to the story of Reverend Sylvestre, how he has been able to be an asset to seeing how religious leaders could be looked differently by stakeholders, both nationally and internationally. Reverend Sylvestre, you're welcome. As I said, you are the General Secretary for the National Council of Churches of Burundi, and we'll be glad to hear you speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for this and for what you have said. Through the collaboration, capacity building, experience sharing, and accompaniment from international NGOs, we were able to influence peace, to influence for national policies, engaging mediation, reconciliation, humanitarian, and also connecting international NGO to the government in this country. Indeed, let me start from 2015, when here in Burundi we had elections which were very, very critical, election that came in a critical moment, but whereby with the support of international NGOs, accompaniment, we were able to engage dialogue within the opposition parties and the ruling party, engaging and discussing with youth from different parties to bring them together to raise their awareness about the common peace of this country, and to come up with a good, stable situation that we faced from 2015 up to 2016 and so on. And what we did together with this accompaniment, we were able to mobilize to build this forum of religious leaders that helped everyone to continue influencing for national policies, peace, reconciliation, engaging different parties through the dialogue in the 2020 election. And before that, we had many meetings. First of all, we had the different meeting, interreligious, a team of religious leaders pay a mission to Nairobi, Kenya, where we met the team of mediation, and especially we met Joseph Warioba and also Kiplagat and many other people, leaders that helped, who were helping Burundi for inter-Burundian dialogue. We had also a meeting with the former president, Mukapa, who was helping Burundian to sit together and discuss their issues. We were able to influence the mediation. We had also meetings in Addis, Ethiopia, with the support of WCC, whereby we were able to meet different religious leaders from Rwanda, DRC, and especially from Burundi, where we concluded that with Burundian religious leader from Burundi should meet. And we had a very big meeting with the support of WCC and the Security Council, where we had Adama Dieng and his staff. We sat together in Arusha. We discussed the issue together with religious leaders from Muslims, Catholic, and Protestant, and we come up with a statement which helped the government until the former vice president, the first vice president, took in consideration within the meeting, their meeting, the president cabinet, so that from the recommendation we provided, those recommendations helped, and we are very happy for that. We prayed also another mission in Europe, in Brussels, where we were able to meet many people there, especially the European Coalition for Israel. We discussed with those people and many other senators and members of European Parliament. And also it was a good time to meet some refugees, politicians who were refugees in Belgium. And we came the day we finished our mission. I was very happy that we came together with the former president, Sylvestre, who decided to come back in his country. We came together, and now he's here in the country until now. We prayed also another mission in Switzerland, whereby religious leaders from DRC, from Rwanda, from South Sudan, from Mali, we were able to meet and discuss about the issue of security, reconciliation policies in our different countries. And as a resolution, we put in place a forum of African religious leaders where we can discuss, and this was hosted by was hosted by Switzerland, especially through the Swiss population of Burundi and the embassy of Switzerland in DRC. And after that, we paid also another mission where in DRC in Kinshasa, after the election of DRC, where we were able to meet the Fayulu, the candidate who was supposed to win elections, and many other different leaders, for instance, the former prime minister, the prime minister of that time, religious leader, the mission of UN MONUSCO, and many other actors for peace. And we are very happy that the DRC now, even though the issues are still there, but we bring something that helps DRC to be where he has been so far. And also we have been able to be in Tanzania to meet through what we call cross-border peace building. We discuss with religious leaders from Tanzania, from DRC also, to discuss about what can be our contribution for peace. Even in the situation of COVID-19, we did something because the border was closed. In DRC, they played a very big job by advocating, and in our side, we did the same. And now we are very happy now the border of Gatumba is workable. We were also able to go to US in Washington, DC, before the election of 2020, where we met people from the State House, the Department of State House. We discussed with a responsible of religion, and we tried to convince her how they can help Burundi through the election, which was well in preparation for 2020. We met a number of senators in the US, and one of the good things that I'm happy for, we were able to meet a senator who was able to connect at that time the President Kagame and the President Nkurunziza at that time, and we were able to explain the situation of Burundi. And we went also in New York City, and we were able to meet different different leaders. For instance, we met at the Security Council, the staff, the deputy and other staff member of Adama Dieng. We met the ambassador of Switzerland in the Security Council, who was in charge of Burundi and Rwanda. We discussed about the issue of Burundi and Rwanda. He came in Burundi, he went in Rwanda, he met different leaders, including religious leaders, to make change. We met also in Washington, DC, and also in New York City. We were able to meet religious leaders, civil society, and NGOs that are working under the United Nations Security Council. In brief, we did many things to make change in this country. Let me mention also the role we played by lobbying and advocacy when the Burundi government was in conflict with NGO. We make a good advocacy.
Thank you, Reverend. That's great.
Okay, thank you so much. We have many.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the list is quite long.
By saying thank you so much, international NGO. You help so much religious leader to unite them and to bring other religious leaders through the conference that was organized by American Friends Service Committee at Royal Palace, so that we may learn from others' experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Reverend.
To accompany us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend. Great. I'm much overwhelmed and glad to hear the achievements you've been able to go through, because this shows that if we bring that needed support to religious leaders, it's going to bring a lot of change. They can be able to drive a number of processes. And what's important here is for us to recognize that Reverend Sylvestre, as a religious leader, was not only acting for his country, but he acted for other countries. He mentioned DR Congo. He also mentioned Burundi-Rwanda relationship and many other countries. So it's for us to understand that building these capacities, accompanying these religious leaders, is not only for the particular country, but there can be issues beyond that they can actually interact, engage with other religious leaders in those countries, and being able to engage with some of the diplomatic missions in New York, and also mentioning about the US Congress and the State Department. It's something that is really very important for us to note that it can be widely utilized if we give those skills as needed. So I want to run up here. I know it's actually been summarizing the discussions as they come. So this gives us some room for Q&A. And I want to go quickly to Q&A, and I'll be reading from the chat. So you can actually use the Q&A chat platform here, or you use the chat. I've seen that some people have used the chat instead. So I will start with Nadine Dikumasapo. I think she's a staff with the American Foreign Service Committee. Her question is that the NGOs, are they aware that religious leaders must be accompanied so that they can act together irrespective of their ethnic groups? So this is something that I would like one of the panel members to take. So our international NGOs or local NGOs, are they aware that religious leaders have to be accompanied? I think Phil can answer this one so that they can work together irrespective of their backgrounds. Okay, so Phil, you know that one. I'll bring the second question, which will answer the questions very rapidly. Thank you, Dr. Agnes, for listing the role of religious leaders. This comes from Solomon Belay. The question is, I also think we should look at the true nature of human beings, their spirit. In Africa, we did not forget the true nature of human being is their spirit stroke soul, which plays the major role in any peace, economic, and social activities. Unless political leaders understand the nature of the spirit and what role it plays in human beings, they can't govern peacefully. The religious leaders, therefore, need to focus more on ascertaining and expanding the role of the spirit and soul in peace and prosperity. This is coming from Solomon Baha'i International Community, Addis Ababa. Yeah, so Dr. Agnes, those were some other highlights that were coming to you. Here's a question from Q&A. Thank you, Sorav. This is something that is coming. Let me read the question first. In some East African countries and some political authorities don't want religious leaders to touch on political related themes. And some religious leaders also do not, and some religious leaders also are not working in neutrality on some political related topics. How can be any good way of working between religious leaders and the political authorities? And I think, Reverend Sylvestre, you can actually take this from your experience. How have you been able to work? Because the suspicion is that some religious leaders play the politics and some don't want to be part of it. So how can you be able to work between religious leaders and political authorities to bring peace together in communities because of the role they play? So Reverend, you can take that one.
Can you repeat the question, please? Can you repeat the question so that I may understand?
Exactly. In some East African countries, some political authorities don't want religious leaders to touch on political issues. Do you understand? They don't want them to touch on political issues. and some religious leaders are not working in neutrality. This means that some religious leaders also belong to political parties of favor. Okay. Can there be any way of working between religious leaders and political authority to bring peace together in community because of the role they play? So I think this is an experience you have also lived. So we'll give you the space. Okay. We have been also in Vienna, the Republic of, this is Reverend Sylvestre writing. Okay. I think there's one question that came from, sorry for this, came from Kennedy Gahungu. In some East African countries, okay, I think this is the one I read. So Phil, you can answer the question, and then Agnes could make a comment on the other one, and then Reverend could now respond to the politics and religion.
Thank you. I think I'll just pick up actually on the question that was also directed to Reverend and the neutrality of religious leaders. A couple of years ago, we actually traveled with the religious network of Burundi to South Sudan. And one of our mission was just to understand how the religious groups have played on peace in the country. And one of the key issues that came up is whenever religious leaders are not seen to be neutral and are seen to be looking in one side, then the trust that they hold is lost. And so I think we all have definitely some opinion on issues, or we also fall within some ethnic group. It's whether by default, it's something that happens to us, and we find ourselves in that situation. But I think as leaders or even mediators, in situations that are especially influenced by ideological differences or led by ethnic differences, it's always important for the mediators a neutral role and keep their opinions to themselves. And I think for me, in areas where ethnicity is a major player in situations of conflict, it is important that religious leaders try as much as possible to keep that out so that they are seen neutral and they deal with situations. I think that is what I would say. And definitely for us as external groups, we need to walk that journey with the religious leaders. We do know that they already have a lot of training, whether it's through their theological trainings and other things, and they do understand some of these principles. But for us to accompany them and to work with them, and also for people to appreciate that we will always have our differences, and we need to appreciate those different aspirations that we have, but we need to have at a united front. I think that is the key underpinning for me. Sorry, thank you, Moses.
Thank you, Phil. That was quite good response. Dr. Agnes?
Yeah, thank you so much, Solomon, for that question or comment, which is very, very powerful, in the sense that we come from a history. I think the moderator of this session referred us back to World War I, World War II. We come from a history where there has been every effort to demean matters spiritual, religious, as backward, useless, not progressive enough for development. We also have a situation where, because of the power of religious communities, certain political, economic power spaces and forces would not want to bring issues related to spirit and soul in the equation. Now, we've seen, as I said, a major change, even in terms of development, socioeconomic development, community development, where the soul of a human being is actually now recognized as important, the soul of a nation. And having said that, therefore, I want to agree with you that we must restore, re-energize our communities to acknowledge more and more the wholeness of life, and particularly the false notion in government secular circles that believe the soul and the spirit have no space. So my approach is to affirm what you are saying and use the concept of wholeness of life in human relations, in the political agendas, in economic, social relations. So I agree with you, but it has to be intentional. And as a number of the commentators have rightly said, there is a tendency not to value religion. But now there is space. Even the Economic Forum now recognizes the place of religion. Hence, the need for us, like what the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya has rightly put, the wholeness of the church, the wholeness of a diocese, the wholeness of a people, we need to recoup, restore. Just affirming what you've said, we won't go very far unless certain concepts are restored from even our own traditional religious beliefs. We need to restore them because they were also thrown out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Reverend, you want to come now with the question on religion and politics,
yes.
neutrality?
Yes. Thank you so much. I would like to say that, yes, we know that politicians don't like that people talk about the political issues. We know that, but for instance, here in Burundi, when the ruling party talked about that, we sat together with a certain number of religious leaders, and we bring some strategies to approach them by identifying people religious leaders who are able to approach this and this, and we decided to meet everyone separately. We discuss those issues, and at the end, we came up with a good solution. I'm very sure I reported to Moses and Jacques and Philip how the way we use to bring, to approach, to address those issues to them, even though they don't like those issues to be discussed. I think we make a strategy that we can use through people who have relationship with different politicians that we want to address, to talk about. And according to neutrality, yes, every person has its own position, but in Burundi, as religious leaders, we said, let us have common principles to address those issues. Of course, you have some religious leaders, they are not all who can belong to this party or this, but we said, even though you belong to this and this, you have to understand that the issue, we have the common understanding of peace, so that we may have some common principles. That's what we use, so that we may help those people who belong to this party or this, and we continue discussing with them, raising their awareness, and we think with the time, those small issues, barriers that can make peace and the integrity of religious leader in problem, we will continue to discuss. But let me tell you that the most of religious leaders understand in this country that we have to be to build the culture of integrity and also neutral. But in terms of politics or the issue of the nation, every person has its own position, but we said, let us have some common principles so that we may help this country to move on and making change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend. It's all about continuous sensitization, educating, because again, as time goes on, people become weak and they forget the call to which they came to this world and what they have actually said, yes, they're going to do. So that's quite useful for us to recognize that religious leaders have their weaknesses. So we have to work, support them to be able to overcome that. I see that the time is running, so we are rounding up. I want to say it's been great discussion. I want to recognize the place of religious leaders in influencing national processes, because there is always that issue of restricted spaces. I said earlier, be it in conflict settings or the COVID-19 situation, the restricted spaces have actually been highly used by governments and preventing the efforts that will come from the international community. But this should not mean that all is lost, because we have an alternative way of engaging and bringing change within the different countries. And this can only come if we recognize the group of national actors that can actually make a difference. So this is great. And I want to say the international community also, we know the issue of P&G, persona non grata, where governments could give 24 hours, 48 hours for some envoys, special envoys, or leaders of certain missions and or agencies to leave the country. So, but it doesn't mean that we have to continuously think more about this, but think more about the change we want to bring in that country and who are the actors that can bring that change. So we found out that this was the best route that we could use to engage with the religious leaders. We want to thank you all. Thanking the panelists. I want to thank Reverend Sylvestre for sacrificing this time and being with us. I want to also thank Philip Delgado for also taking the time to talk with us. I want to thank Dr. Agnes for your tight schedule. You are able to also make time and be with us. Thank you so much. And the support of your office, I want to also recognize that. And also want to thank Jack Sanya of the Norwegian Church 8 for also the great presentation that he did here. And thanking also the participants. I know some of them have left, but we are grateful for your listening. This is something we want to propagate. This is something we want to use to bring change and contribute to more stable communities, more stable societies within the world, within Africa, within the Middle East, within Asia, within Latin America, and even in the United States of America. So I want to say this is an opportunity. Many organizations are embracing this model, and we can actually make a difference if we embrace the model. Let's see how we can empower local actors for them to be able to do what is best. Thank you, Alliance for Peace Building, PeaceCon, and thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to speak. It's really great. For us, it's about seeing how the work of this particular group of actors can be amplified. We see that it can go beyond a country, right through to the United States, right through to Europe, right through to other parts of the world that we don't have enough time to mention. So thank you so much, colleagues, friends, and thank you, Sarah, for standing with us. All the best. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Have a
Bye.
great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.